"Rancher, are you like everyone else, just wanting something from me?" the Apache widow demanded. He had been riding all day, following the herd across the open range, but somehow he had strayed far from the trails he knew so well. His horse, though loyal, was tired and limping slightly, and he could feel the stiffness in his own legs from hours of riding. Every turn he took seemed to lead him deeper into unfamiliar territory, and the shadows of the approaching evening made the land look harsher, almost unwelcoming. He had heard stories about the outskirts of this area, the land where the Apache lived. Outsiders often treated it with fear, whispering tales of conflicts that had faded into history but still lingered in memory. The rancher wasn't sure if those stories were true, but tonight he felt a strange mix of fear and relief as he spotted a plume of smoke rising in the distance. It suggested someone was near, someone who had fire, food, and shelter. He only hoped it wasn't a trap. By the time he reached the source, he was exhausted. His body ached from the long ride, his hands were blistered from holding the reins, and his lips were cracked from the dry wind. Then, as if the land itself had decided to test him one last time, his horse stumbled over a hidden rock. He fell forward, and pain shot through his side. When he tried to get up, dizziness overwhelmed him. The last thing he remembered before losing consciousness was the smell of smoke and the faint sound of someone approaching quickly. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on a bed of soft blankets inside a small but tidy dwelling. The room was simple, just a few pieces of furniture, a hearth with a gentle fire, and some handmade pottery on a shelf. His horse was tied outside, munching on a bundle of oats that had been placed nearby. The rancher tried to speak, to thank whoever had helped him, but his throat was dry and his voice barely made a whisper. A woman appeared then, standing near the doorway. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her dark hair framed a face that carried both strength and sorrow. Her eyes were sharp, almost piercing, and they studied him with an intensity that made him uneasy. She was dressed plainly but with elegance, and there was a quiet authority in the way she carried herself. The rancher immediately realized she was no ordinary woman. "You're awake," she said, her voice steady but carrying a subtle edge. "Don't try to speak yet. Drink this." She handed him a small cup of warm water. He drank slowly, savoring the cool relief it offered while she watched him carefully, as if measuring not only his physical condition but his intentions as well. "Where am I?" he asked finally, his voice hoarse. "You're on my land," she replied, her tone neutral but firm. "I found you near the edge of the hills. You were hurt. I didn't leave you there to die." She introduced herself simply, as someone who didn't need titles or praise. The rancher could tell she had been through much. Life had hardened her, but it hadn't made her cruel. She moved with efficiency, preparing simple food for him, tending to his wounds and checking his pulse. She did all this with a precision born from necessity, not from obligation. Every gesture carried care but also caution. As the rancher rested, he observed his surroundings. The dwelling was built with skill, blending naturally with the land around it. There was a sense of order in the way things were arranged. Every object seemed to have a purpose, every corner a story. Outside, he could see the vast plain stretching beyond the hills, open and wild. Yet it was here, in this small home, that the wildness of life had been tamed with strength and resilience. The woman moved silently around the room, gathering herbs and preparing a small meal. The rancher noticed her efficiency, and the way she seemed to anticipate his needs without him asking. There was no warmth in her touch that one might expect from someone trying to comfort a stranger. Rather, it was a steady, firm competence, a way of saying, "I will help you, but I will not be manipulated or taken advantage of." He wanted to know more about the woman, why she lived so far from others, why she seemed so wary of the world, but he also realized that any question might be received with suspicion. He had heard stories of outsiders who came with promises, favors, or worse, and he suspected she had too. Finally, as the fire crackled and evening deepened, she spoke again. "I don't trust easily," she said, almost as if reading his thoughts. You've been found by chance, but that doesn't mean you're safe here. You might be hurt now, but your intentions matter more than your injuries." He had learned long ago that actions often spoke louder than words, and he resolved that he would let his actions show his honesty. He would not take advantage of her kindness or the safety she had offered. For the first time in many days, he felt a flicker of hope, not just for his body, but for finding a human connection in this harsh land. Night fell, and the room grew quiet except for the soft sound of the fire and the occasional crackle of wood. The woman moved about, checking the herbs she had prepared and ensuring everything was in order for the night. The rancher lay back, exhausted but feeling something he hadn't in a long time: security. It was fragile, temporary perhaps, but it was real. As he drifted to sleep, he wondered about the stories of the land, the Apache people, and the trials they had faced. He realized that he had stumbled into more than just shelter. He had entered a world shaped by resilience, courage, and survival. And the woman who had saved him was not just a helper. She was a person who carried the weight of her own history, who had learned to defend her life and her land with wisdom and strength. He knew that tomorrow he would have to speak with her, to explain who he was and why he had come so far. But tonight he would rest, learning from silence and observation. He had arrived as a stranger, weary and injured, but he would remain cautiously aware that trust was something that had to be earned. The woman's sharp eyes had already made that clear, and he would respect her boundaries. In the quiet of the night, the rancher reflected on the journey that had brought him here, the mistakes that had led him astray, the challenges of the open range, and the unexpected relief of finding a human hand in a wild and unforgiving land. He realized that survival was not just about strength, but about humility, respect, and understanding. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The woman sat quietly nearby, tending to the small household tasks that needed attention. She glanced at the rancher once, a subtle acknowledgement of his presence, but said nothing. Her silence carried meaning. She had saved a life, but she was not yet ready to share her trust, and the rancher understood that perfectly. As sleep finally overcame him, he felt the first sense of peace in days. The journey had been long and difficult, but he had found shelter, care, and a glimpse of humanity in a world that often showed little mercy. He knew that the coming days would be filled with questions, challenges, and perhaps even dangers, but he also understood that he had been given a chance, not just to survive, but to learn from someone who had endured far more than he ever had. And so, in the quiet, remote dwelling on the edge of the plains, a story began, not one of instant friendship, but of cautious respect, the beginning of a bond that could grow only through actions, patience, and understanding. The rancher had arrived as a stranger in need, and the Apache widow had saved him, not out of obligation, but out of strength, skill, and a careful assessment of what was right. In that small act, the first seeds of a connection were planted, ready to grow in the days ahead. The morning sunlight spilled gently into the small dwelling, filling the room with warmth and light. The rancher woke slowly, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the long ride and the fall. But the comfort of the blankets and the steady presence of the widow beside him brought him a sense of safety he had not felt in days. He opened his eyes to see her already moving about the room, preparing breakfast with quiet efficiency. There was no hurry, no unnecessary words, only a calm rhythm that made the space feel alive and cared for. As he stretched and sat up, the rancher noticed how her movements were both precise and graceful. She chopped vegetables with practiced skill, her hands steady despite the roughness that came from years of work. Her face, framed by dark hair, held a mixture of determination and sadness. He realized that this was not just a woman who lived alone by circumstance. She was someone shaped by experience, someone who had endured hardships and yet carried herself with dignity and strength. "Good morning," he said finally, his voice still rough from the previous day. She glanced at him, her dark eyes meeting his. There was a hint of skepticism, but also a measure of curiosity. "Morning," she replied. "Eat. You'll need your strength if you want to move today." She was not one to waste time on small talk or unnecessary pleasantries. Each action was deliberate, each gesture purposeful. As he ate, he noticed small things. The way she cleaned the dishes with care, the way she checked the herbs drying near the fire, the way she paused now and then to glance outside, as if listening to the wind and the land. The rancher realized that this woman had an intimate knowledge of her surroundings. She could read the land as easily as one might read a book, and that knowledge had been forged through both necessity and survival. Once breakfast was finished, she handed him a small cloth to wash his hands. "You'll need to keep clean if you want to heal properly," she said. There was no warmth in her tone, no softness that one might expect from someone helping a stranger. Instead, there was a firmness, a way of saying that healing was a responsibility shared, that kindness did not mean weakness. The rancher followed her instructions, washing carefully. As he did, he could not help but notice the strength in her hands. They were hands that had built, repaired, and carried burdens far heavier than his own. Yet, despite their roughness, they moved with precision, almost elegance. He realized that she had survived not by relying on others, but by relying on herself, and that survival had made her wary of outsiders. Once he had finished, she gestured toward the door. "You should rest a little more. Walking too soon could make your injuries worse." He obeyed, understanding that she knew better than he did how to recover. He lay back down, closing his eyes, and let the quiet of the dwelling and the soft sounds of her movement soothe him. As the day passed, the rancher began to notice more about her life. He saw the small garden outside, carefully tended and thriving despite the harshness of the land. He noticed the way she gathered firewood with efficiency and stored it neatly, how she repaired tools and prepared for tasks before they were needed. Every action spoke of foresight, responsibility, and the kind of strength that came from years of self-reliance. Despite her caution, she allowed him to help in small ways. He fetched water from a nearby stream, carried firewood, and tidied the small dwelling. Each task he performed quietly without asking for praise or recognition. She watched him closely, assessing his intentions, measuring not only his strength but his character. It was clear to the rancher that she had learned the hard way that not everyone who offered help was sincere. Many came seeking something from her, whether it was land, resources, or favors. Trust was earned, and she had no reason to give it freely. In the late afternoon, as they worked together to repair a small fence near the edge of her land, she finally spoke in a tone that carried both caution and challenge. "You are different from the others, aren't you?" she asked. The rancher paused, surprised by the directness of the question. "I hope so," he replied carefully. "I didn't come here to take anything from you. I only needed help to survive. If I were in your place, I would feel the same." As the sun began to set, casting a warm orange glow over the plains, the woman paused in her work and looked out over the land. There was a sadness in her eyes, a reflection of losses she had endured. The rancher understood that her caution was not just about him. It was about a lifetime of experience, of learning that kindness could be exploited, and that strength was necessary for survival. "I have seen many come and go," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Many who promised respect, many who promised friendship. In the end, they only wanted what they could take. I am not like them," he said softly. "I do not want anything from you except your trust, and I am willing to earn it slowly if that is what it takes." Words could deceive, promises could be broken, but actions revealed truth. Over the next several days, he continued to prove himself. He helped with chores, repaired small damages, and worked quietly alongside her, never asking for recognition or reward. Each day, she observed him, noting his reliability, his respect for her boundaries, and the care he took with her land and home. One evening, as they sat near the fire, she finally allowed herself to share a little of her story. She spoke of her husband, who had passed many years ago, leaving her to manage the land alone. She spoke of neighbors and travelers who had come with intentions that seemed kind at first but had turned selfish over time. She did not speak with anger but with a quiet sadness, a reflection of the life she had lived and the lessons she had learned. The rancher listened attentively, realizing that she was testing him not just through words but through sharing her experiences. She wanted to see if he would respond with understanding, empathy, and respect. He did not interrupt, did not judge, and did not offer empty reassurances. He simply listened, and in that act he earned a small measure of her trust. Over time, their daily interactions became less formal and more comfortable. He began to anticipate her needs, fetching water before she asked, repairing tools she used often, and helping with small tasks without her needing to direct him. She began to allow him into her space in ways she had not before, sharing meals and stories, even allowing brief moments of laughter. It was a slow, careful process, but one that marked the beginning of a bond built on mutual respect and understanding. Yet, even as trust began to grow, the widow remained vigilant. She asked questions, observed behavior, and tested intentions subtly. One day, as they repaired a section of the fence together, she looked at him sharply and said, "Rancher, are you like everyone else, just wanting something from me?" "No," he said quietly but firmly. "I do not want anything from you except your trust. I will earn it day by day through my actions. That is all I ask." It was not complete trust, not yet, but it was the first sign that she believed he might be different from those who had come before. The days continued in a rhythm of work, quiet conversation, and careful observation. The rancher learned not just about her life, but about the land itself, the plants, the animals, the rhythms of nature that she had mastered. He began to understand that survival was not just about strength, but about knowledge, patience, and respect. And in this understanding, he found a deeper appreciation not only for her, but for the life she had created for herself against all odds. As the sun set each day, casting golden light across the plains, he realized that he was no longer just a visitor in her world. He had become a part of it, cautiously accepted, still watched but valued. And in the quiet moments by the fire, he understood that trust, once earned, could be the foundation for something lasting, something real, something far stronger than any promise or word. The following morning, the rancher woke to a soft golden light streaming through the small window of the dwelling. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the earth and the herbs she had drying by the hearth. He stretched slowly, feeling the healing in his muscles and the quiet relief of a body that had endured much but was now regaining strength. For the first time, he noticed how peaceful the surroundings were, yet there was an undercurrent of tension, a subtle reminder that he was still an outsider in a world he did not fully understand. The widow was already up, moving about with her usual efficiency. She arranged her tools neatly, checked the small garden for damage, and tended the few animals she kept. Her every motion spoke of precision, knowledge, and responsibility. The rancher admired her silently, realizing that this woman's life had been shaped by necessity, endurance, and intelligence. She had learned to survive on her own terms, and that survival had left a mark, not of bitterness but of strength. "Good morning," he said as he entered the room, careful not to disturb her rhythm. She glanced at him briefly and nodded. "Morning, eat quickly. We have work to do." Her tone was firm, yet there was no harshness. It was clear she expected effort and attention, and he was determined to meet her expectations. They ate in silence, the only sounds being the faint clink of dishes and the soft crackle of the fire. The rancher noticed how every action she took, every movement she made seemed purposeful. Nothing was wasted, nothing neglected. He realized that her efficiency was born from experience, from a lifetime of doing what had to be done to survive, rather than from convenience. After breakfast, they headed outside to tend to the land. The widow pointed out areas that needed repair, spots where the fence had weakened or where the soil needed attention. The rancher followed her instructions carefully, learning not just how to perform tasks, but why each task mattered. She explained the importance of maintaining the land, of respecting its resources, and of preparing for challenges before they arose. Her teachings were subtle, but he absorbed them eagerly, sensing that each lesson carried more than just practical value. It was a glimpse into her life, her experiences, and her resilience. As the day progressed, the rancher noticed the way the widow interacted with the world around her. She moved with awareness, listening to the wind, observing the behavior of animals and anticipating changes in the weather. She taught him to read signs that he had never noticed before. The way the grass bent under a breeze, the sound of birds in the distance, the subtle shifts in light that foretold the arrival of a storm. Each observation was a lesson, and each lesson deepened his respect for her. During a break under the shade of a lone tree, she finally spoke more about her past. "I have lived here a long time," she said quietly, her gaze distant. "I have seen people come and go. Some were kind, some were selfish. Some promised friendship but only wanted gain. I have learned to protect myself, to protect this land, and to trust slowly if at all." "I understand," he said softly. "I do not want anything from you except the chance to show that I am different. That is all I ask." He learned to anticipate her needs, understanding the rhythm of her life and adapting to it with care. The widow observed him closely, noting not just his work but the attitude with which he approached it. His actions were consistent, humble, and respectful, and slowly she began to see that he truly was different from those who had come before. One evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, they sat together by the fire. The rancher noticed how her expression softened slightly in the warmth of the flames. She did not speak immediately, but there was a quiet understanding between them, a moment of shared calm that was rare and fragile. Finally, she broke the silence. "You are proving yourself," she said slowly, almost as if measuring her own words. "Not everyone does. Many people come with empty promises, but your actions, they are steady. They are real. I only want to show that I respect you, your home, and your life." He was willing to do whatever it took to maintain it, knowing that any misstep could undo the progress they had made. Over the following weeks, their bond grew, slowly but surely. The rancher learned more about her life, her routines, and her past. She shared stories of her husband, the challenges of managing the land alone, and the lessons she had learned from hardship and loss. He listened with empathy, never interrupting, never judging, and never offering empty reassurances. His quiet understanding became a foundation for the trust that was beginning to form between them. The widow, in turn, began to rely on him in small ways. She allowed him to assist with tasks that required strength, to carry heavier loads, and to take on responsibilities that she had always managed alone. Each time she allowed this, it was a small test of his reliability and character. Each time he proved himself, the bond between them grew stronger. One day, as they worked together to repair a section of the fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, she spoke with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Rancher," she said, her voice steady but carrying weight, "why do you stay? You could leave any time. You could return to your life, to your people. Why remain here, helping someone you barely know? You saved my life, and I want to repay that kindness in the only way I know how, through action, not words. You are real." The widow, too, felt the subtle shift. She had spent years protecting herself from the world, guarding her heart and her land. She had learned that kindness could be exploited, that trust could be dangerous if given too freely. And yet this man, this rancher who had appeared lost and injured, had proven himself through his actions, showing patience, respect, and sincerity. In the quiet of the night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside, they shared small moments of conversation and laughter, finding common ground in the simplicity of daily life. He listened to her stories, asked thoughtful questions, and offered his help without expectation. She, in turn, allowed him to be present, to share the space she had long guarded, and to participate in the life she had built for herself. Despite the growing bond, both remained aware of the fragile nature of trust. One wrong word, one misstep, could undo everything they had built. But for the first time in many years, the widow allowed herself to feel a small measure of hope, that not everyone who came into her life would take from it, and that genuine, honest companionship could exist, even in the harsh and unforgiving land they called home. As days turned into weeks, their routine became seamless. They worked together, laughed together, and shared quiet moments of reflection. The rancher continued to prove himself through steady actions, while the widow cautiously allowed herself to open up in ways she had not in years. Their relationship was one of respect, patience, and shared understanding, an unspoken acknowledgement that true connection was earned, not demanded. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills and the sky glowed with warm colors, the widow turned to him with a question that had weighed heavily on her mind for years. "Rancher," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "are you like everyone else, just wanting something from me? I will continue to show you through my actions that I respect you, your life, and your trust. That is all I seek." It was a small, quiet victory, the beginning of a deeper bond that had been carefully nurtured over weeks of shared effort, patience, and understanding. And so, in the quiet of the evening, with the fire casting gentle shadows across the room, the rancher and the widow sat together, knowing that trust had been given cautiously but sincerely, and that the path ahead, while uncertain, was one they could navigate together, through respect, honesty, and the steady demonstration of character. The morning sun rose slowly over the hills, painting the land with shades of gold and orange. The rancher woke to the sound of birds singing softly in the distance and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. His body felt stronger, fully recovered from the injuries that had brought him to the widow's home. But he knew that physical strength alone was not enough. He needed patience, understanding, and respect to navigate the delicate balance of trust that had been carefully built over the past weeks. The widow was already awake, tending the small fire and preparing the simple morning meal. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and calm as always. The rancher observed her quietly, admiring her strength and skill. She had created a life that was self-sufficient and resilient, and he understood that her independence was not born from choice alone, but from necessity. Every decision she made, every action she took, was guided by experience, wisdom, and the desire to protect what she held dear. "Good morning," he said softly, careful not to disturb the calm rhythm of the home. "Morning," she replied, her tone steady but not unkind. She handed him a cup of warm water. "Drink. You'll need your strength today." As he did, he noticed the care she put into even the smallest details, preparing food, arranging the blankets, checking the herbs. It was clear that she valued order and consistency, not for appearances but as a way to survive and thrive in a harsh world. After breakfast, they stepped outside to tend to the land. The rancher carried tools and supplies, assisting with tasks that required strength and coordination. They worked together in silence, the only sounds being the soft clinking of tools, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional call of birds in the distance. The widow directed him with clear, concise instructions, and he followed faithfully, understanding that his role was to support and help, not to interfere. As the sun climbed higher, a distant cloud of dust appeared on the horizon. The rancher noticed it first, instinctively reaching for a tool as if prepared for the worst. The widow followed his gaze and stiffened. "Settlers," she said quietly. "They are coming too close to the land." She had faced such threats before, and she knew that preparation was essential. Together, they moved to secure the property. The rancher helped reinforce fences, gather tools, and prepare for any potential intrusion. The widow's instructions were precise, and he followed without hesitation. It was a silent partnership, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and the shared goal of protecting the land and each other. As the settlers approached, their intentions became clear. They were men who sought to claim a portion of the land, speaking loudly and making demands. But the widow did not flinch. She stood firm, her presence commanding respect, her eyes steady and unwavering. The rancher stood beside her, ready to assist, but he knew that her strength and authority were the key to maintaining control. "State your purpose," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the distance. "This land is protected. We will not allow anyone to take what is not theirs." But the widow remained calm, responding with clarity and firmness. She had faced such challenges before, and she knew that fear or anger would only weaken her position. The rancher watched in admiration, understanding that her courage was not reckless. It was deliberate, informed by experience, and guided by the necessity to protect what mattered most. Seeing her resolve, the settlers hesitated. They realized that they were not dealing with a woman who would be easily intimidated or manipulated. The rancher could feel the tension ease slightly, knowing that her determination and confidence had set the tone. Together, they stood united, a quiet but formidable force, demonstrating that true strength came from integrity, courage, and the willingness to act when necessary. After the settlers left, muttering complaints and retreating down the trail, the widow turned to the rancher. "You see," she said quietly, "strength is not only in the hands or the body, but in the mind and the heart. One must know when to act and when to wait." He had seen her courage firsthand, not in reckless displays but in measured actions that commanded respect and protected what was important. He realized that he had learned much from her, not just about survival, but about life, resilience, and the meaning of trust. That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold, they sat together by the fire. The rancher looked at the widow and saw not only strength but vulnerability. He understood that her caution, her careful assessment of others, and her initial skepticism had all been shaped by experience and necessity. Yet beneath that guarded exterior, there was a person capable of deep compassion, loyalty, and understanding. "I have watched you these past weeks," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of respect and caution. "You have proven yourself through your actions, not words. Many would have left, many would have sought to take advantage. But you have been steady, reliable, and true." "I only wanted to show that I am different," he said. "I do not seek anything from you except your trust, and I will continue to earn it every day through my actions. But I believe you are genuine." He realized that this connection, fragile yet strong, was a rare and precious thing in a world that often valued gain over integrity. Days passed, and the partnership between them continued to grow. They worked together, shared meals, and tended to the land with care. The rancher learned more about the widow's life, her routines, and the challenges she faced. He admired her resourcefulness, her intelligence, and her unwavering commitment to her land and community. In turn, the widow began to trust him more fully, allowing him to participate in decisions, share responsibilities, and even offer his opinion when appropriate. One evening, as they repaired a small section of the fence damaged by a recent storm, the widow turned to the rancher with a question that had weighed on her mind. "Why do you stay?" she asked. "You could leave any time, return to your own life, your own people. Why remain here, helping someone you barely know?" "Because I believe in what is right," he said finally. "I believe in honesty, respect, and helping those who need it without expecting anything in return. You saved my life, and I want to repay that kindness by being here, by helping you, by showing that not everyone seeks to take. Some people are willing to give, simply because it is the right thing to do. But you have proven yourself through your actions." The widow spoke of her husband, the responsibilities she had shouldered alone, and the wisdom gained through years of survival and resilience. Through these conversations, they grew closer, not through romance alone, but through mutual understanding and shared respect. The rancher realized that trust and companionship were earned through patience, empathy, and consistent effort. The widow saw in him a steadfastness that few had ever demonstrated, a willingness to act with integrity, and a respect for her independence. Then came the day when a new challenge arose. A group of outsiders arrived, seeking land and resources nearby. They were loud, aggressive, and demanding. The widow, though experienced, faced a difficult choice: defend the land alone or rely on the rancher's strength and support. She looked to him, seeing the readiness in his eyes and the determination in his posture. Together, they would face this threat, not as strangers but as partners. The confrontation was tense. Words were exchanged, threats made, and intentions tested. But the widow stood firm, her authority clear and unwavering. The rancher supported her without hesitation, reinforcing her decisions and demonstrating that he was not merely an observer, but a participant in protecting what was rightfully hers. The outsiders, seeing the strength and unity of the pair, eventually withdrew, muttering threats but leaving the land intact. After the tension subsided, the widow turned to the rancher, her expression soft but serious. "You have proven yourself beyond doubt," she said. "Not only in deeds but in character. You have stood beside me not for gain but because it was right, and for that I trust you completely." It was not victory in battle, nor recognition from others, but the quiet, profound acknowledgement that trust had been earned and shared. Together, they had faced danger, challenges, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, united not by circumstance alone, but by respect, integrity, and shared experience. As the days continued, their lives intertwined seamlessly. They worked the land together, shared meals, and built routines that reflected their mutual understanding. The rancher no longer saw himself as an outsider, and the widow no longer viewed him with suspicion. Instead, they had formed a bond that was both resilient and genuine, a testament to the power of trust, patience, and unwavering integrity. In the quiet of the evening, as the fire burned and the wind whispered through the trees, the rancher and the widow sat side by side, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. They had begun as strangers, wary and uncertain, and now they stood as allies, friends, and companions in a world that demanded strength, wisdom, and courage. And in that moment, they understood something profound: that true trust, once earned, could withstand challenges, danger, and the passage of time. That respect, kindness, and integrity were the foundation of connection. And that even in a harsh and unforgiving land, two people could find safety, understanding, and companionship, not through words alone, but through actions, choices, and unwavering character.